Coming up this weekend, in the future, Garry looking to be the second big-time champ in the UFC behind his idol, Conor McGregor. He's taking on gifted Gabe Green. And in terms of excitement level for fights coming up this weekend, I love this fight because if you watch Gabe Green's last fight, he got fucking floored by the biggest right hand you're ever going to see in your whole life. Stop whatever you're doing. If you're on a plane listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wait till you safely land, turn airplane mode off, go on Fight Pass and watch Gabe Green because he drops his hand and Lioness lands the big, windmill overhand right. Flush on Green. Green face plants in. Then Lioness he gets into an opportune position. He's inside control. Green recovers himself, gets back up. As that fight goes on, Lioness slows down. Green starts to take over. And if you've ever watched a Gabe Green fight, there's a few things that you need to know. Well, but even before his fight against Johan Lioness, he had corrective eye surgery to get rid of the fact that he had no depth perception and couldn't catch a ball. Well, all of a sudden, now he can see. Well, now he's a world beater. And oh, by the way, in training last year, he had a fight that was booked. It fell out because he got hit to the heart and nearly had a heart attack. He was in hospital for a few days. He had to recover for a few months. So Gabe Green went through some crazy stuff before his fight against Johan Lioness. And Lioness was billed as this South Shore badass out of Montreal. He was this wicked striker that could knock out a horse. Gabe Green proved that he's an iron horse. He's got just an iron heart as well and an iron will. So for Gabe Green, change it to Iron as your nickname. For Ian Garry, get rid of the future.
Gabe Green, thick skin and an elastic heart.
Ian Garry's... Shia LaBeouf was in that music video. Ian Garry, though, for the future, I don't like the nickname, but I love it because for Garry, about this time last year, he won the Cage Warriors welterweight title. He beat a lightweight in poor Mr. Jack Grant, but he did it so decisively and looked amazing there. Before that, the win over Jack Grant, win over Rostam Akhman, the hair sweater guy, a win over Lawrence Tracy by TKO, getting it done, making moves, starting grooves before they knew we were gone, ends up in the UFC. And when you look at it for Jack Grant, some of the promo material, it's the fact that he had over 300 boxing matches, started at the age of 10. By the age of 18, he was a black belt in judo because Conor McGregor was a champ, so he had to kind of make those moves. But when you do look at it, Ian Garry's one of those guys that subscribes to the diet of TB12 and the McGregor fast system.
Just, Ian Garry, don't talk about it, be about it. Here's the thing that I cannot...
And he's about it.
He is, but here's the thing. If you're this good in all of your press conferences and stuff, if you're as funny as you like to tell us, don't just rehash old lines that other people have used. That's the one thing that bothers me, because Ian Garry has everything. He's a good-looking guy. He has a fun fighting style.
Swinging a big hammer.
He has a very fun personality. He's someone who likes to be on camera. But you only talk about how, I'm like Chael Sonnen and Conor McGregor. I can talk as well as anybody. But I couldn't tell you a single line Ian Garry has ever said in a press conference, and I could do a ton of them with Conor and Chael Sonnen. It's been a while since I've been a UFC fan to that point where I was watching the press conferences trying to remember the lines, but still, Ian Garry, we hear about all this great stuff, but up until this point, it's been a lot of promise, and the results have still been good, don't get me wrong. He's an undefeated former champion who's only 24 years old. It's just... we talk about Ian Garry like he's already this champ in the future, but we have yet to really see him put in the work to get to that point. And I do liken it a little bit to Devin Haney fighting George Kambosos Jr. not that long ago. Devin Haney was very hyped up going into that fight. He flew down to another man's home country and fought him in front of 60,000 people. But Haney up until that point, and I think what you said about him winning the Cage Warriors title against a smaller guy is great. Don't worry, pat on the back for that. Because Devin Haney fought guys who were smaller than him, moving up to his weight class. He was fighting guys who were past their prime, and he was kind of taking some damage in those fights. He was winning, but there was always an oh, by the way, and I gotta be honest, I liken Ian Garry a little bit to a guy like Devin Haney, where if everything goes right and he is able to check all the boxes on his potential, then yes, I really do think Ian Garry, if he can combine his wrestling with how pure his striking looks, yes, he could be a top 15 guy in the future. It's just, I hate it when we talk about these guys doing the things they have yet to do. Gabe Green's a really difficult fight for anybody in the UFC. He has good takedowns. He has a good chin. He has absurd power if he's able to land on you himself. This is my whole point with Jack Della Maddalena when he fought Ramzan Emeev. It was, hey, you have a hyped up prospect against a very boring fighter, for being honest, but a good one at that, who can make anybody look bad on any given day. What did Jack Della Maddalena go and do? He turned his organs to mashed potatoes, hit him with a bunch of body shots, didn't take a single punch, and now we understand why he's so hyped up as a prospect. Ian Garry needs a performance like that, almost like a flawless performance, for the more broad-based fans to really get on board with him, because I feel like he does have a very big following in Europe, and he's starting to get a following in the UFC, but he gets cracked a lot early in a lot of his shots. He does tend to fight at his opponent's strengths sometimes, and I do worry about that when he's fighting upper echelon guys in the UFC.
That's a weird thing. For Ian Garry, the fight against Jordan Williams. Jordan Williams, he knocked out Gregory Rodriguez. Yeah. That's real, but in that fight, he almost knocked out Ian Garry. And then Ian Garry rallied back and knocked him out. And he gets a bonus out of it, and it was entertaining, and you get to go on the mic and have some fun. His last fight was against Darian Weeks. And Darian Weeks, I like Darian Weeks. He comes out of a smaller gym. He's got wrestling in his back pocket. He can crack. He has good boxing, like good solid fundamentals as Darian Weeks. I know Ian Garry won that fight, 30-27s, 29-28 on one judge's scorecard. Darian Weeks pushed the action, wrestled him up against the cage, had him behind the black line for a lot of that fight. Like, I know Garry won it, and Gary's volume was good, but Darian Weeks brought the fight to him. And I look at this fight, and I kind of draw some parallels. Like, you look at the odds for Garry when he fought Jordan Williams, minus 425 favorite. Darian Weeks, minus 400. When he's taking on Gabe Green, minus 160. So, if you really like Ian Garry, there's a lot of value right there in taking on Gabe Green. And listen, going gets tough. You fight better fighters. Gabe Green, unranked fighter. Maybe you've never heard of him. That's fair. He took his fight on short notice to get into the UFC, replacing Kevin Holland fighting Dana Rodriguez. And just like that, like Darian Weeks losing to Ian Garry, Gabe Green brought the fight to Dana Rodriguez, lost the fight, 30-27's a bound. I watched that fight and went, fuck me, Gabe Green looks pretty fucking good. Like, I want to see this guy fight again. So, Gabe Green goes out there, and what does he do? He fights Phil Rowe. Knocks him down twice. Round 2, round 3. Wins that fight. Wow, okay, Gabe Green. Like, this is pretty good. Phil Rowe's looked good since then. His last time out against Linus gets dropped by that overhand right, solidly onto the mat, and then rallies after that round 2 and looks amazing. Now, of course, Linus tired, but you're going to tire when you go for a finish like that. So, again, I do look at this fight. I absolutely love it. Garry the favorite, minus 160. The comeback on Gabe Green is around a plus 130. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise us there to you. I'll say over under 75% Garry.
I'll say under.
You're going to say under? Slightly over, 732 total votes, 78% Garry, 58% by decision, 34% by knockout for the 22% that have Green, 54% by decision, 36% by knockout. But Matt, again, when Garry was on the come up, big knockouts, the great judo, great control, beating guys in every aspect of the fight. We've seen him kind of concede a little bit of distance in his fight against Darian Weeks, but he won it by decision. We saw his chin check, but he came through on the other side against Jordan Williams. What do you figure out of this one? Because I still think Ian Garry is that prospect that we thought of him as.
It depends on what prospect you ever thought of him as. Because here's the thing. Welterweight's kind of on the come up right now. There's a crop of new contenders at 170 who's offering just a lot of the old heads, if you will, some very interesting challenges. You have Khamzat Chimaev as sort of the face of this new wave. You have guys like Shavkat Rakhmonov, Jack Della Maddalena, who I just brought up, Ian Garry, another one of these hot prospects. I look at him as a clear number 4 out of those top 4, though, if I'm being honest. And I think this fight against Gabe Green's an interesting one because Green's someone who does have holes in his game. You can hit him clean early on because he is a little wild. So I think Ian Garry could win by first round knockout. We all think, wow, he is that prospect. But there's also another world where he hurts Green, similar to Green's last fight against Linus, and then Green gets up and makes the fight really ugly. And I just don't know what Ian Garry's answer is going to be in an ugly fight after that first round because he can wrestle, he can box, he's a very well-rounded mixed martial artist. I just don't know what his natural tendency is going to go to against a guy like Gabe Green. So I think this is going to be an ugly fight for both guys. I think it's going to be very difficult for either guy to look very good in this matchup. But I do think Garry ever so slightly is the more technical guy, and I think that's why he's going to be able to win.
Gabe Green has better footwork in this matchup. He has better core movement. He has more head movement. See what I did there? It's not better, though. He moves his head a lot. He still gets hit a lot. Like, he doesn't
move it into punches.
Gabe Green does not hold his hands up all the time. He holds them low, and then he moves his head, and he moves into punches. Like, I've seen that time and again. I saw it in his last fight against Linus. For a guy that winds up on his power, all of his shots. In Linus, Gabe Green got hit clean, not just by that overhand right that dropped him, but by even just pawing jabs he was hit Ian Garry is a very technical and a guy that has a lot of accuracy behind his shots. Now, the thing that I worry about is Gabe Green has good footwork and he can cut the cage. Ian Garry's a guy that can get backed up. And listen, I take these things with a grain of salt when the commentary talks about it during a fight because they have a narrative. Sometimes we can fall into that trap, I'll be honest. But John Anik talked about it. He said, in talking with Ian Garry, getting ready for Darian Weeks, he said, Ian's used to training with shorter guys. Gabe Green's a shorter guy, so he's used to being able to lean back.
Guys, I've been saying this for a while
And
now.
the point of it is, he says, well, Garry realized it, so in this training camp, he's been working to minimize it. But even in the fight, his last time out against Darian Weeks, he still backs up with his head back.
Daniel Cormier famously said in a press conference before he fought John Jones, hey, I know you're going for the left high kick because I've leaned that way, but it's not going to work because I fixed that. What happened when they fought the next time? And I hate John Jones and love Daniel Cormier, but facts are facts. He head kicked him with that thing. I know Garry might be working. Garry might be working to get rid of that wrinkle from his game, but I think it takes more than one training camp. We see this all the time. People switch training camps and still fight like the exact same fighter they were. It normally takes 1, 2, 3 training camps for you to finally get rid of that wrinkle in your game. So for Garry, I do appreciate that he has the self-awareness to realize that, hey, this has been a problem for me. It's a problem in my training. If I fix it in my training, it should help me in the gym. So I do really appreciate that. But I still think that's going to be a hole that's going to show in this fight. And against a guy like Gabe Green, who can string together combinations and land big shots, it's a dangerous fight. But I still like Ian Garry. And I brought up the name Jack Della Maddalena several times because that's the fight we need to see at this weight class. Both guys want to be that prospect to get into the top 15 next. I think that'd be perfect matchmaking if Ian Garry's able to beat Gabe Green.
I love Gabe Green for what he's worth, and I'm sure I'm going to pick him in a lot of these fights. I might surprise people here, but I do like Ian Garry. The thing that I like about Green is he's well-rounded. His physique is off the charts. In his last fight, he looked bigger. Movement, volume, power. He has everything. Ian Garry is so well-versed in judo. I don't know why we didn't see it against Darian Weeks, because Weeks is a good wrestler in his own right, but I think Ian Garry has that edge over a lot of guys. I think he has it in this fight. Green excels in a lot of positions up against the cage, so maybe Garry loses minutes there. All in all, I think this is a really close fight. You can't go wrong either way. I just look at a guy in Garry that goes from minus 425 to minus 400 to minus 160. I gotta go with Ian Garry in that circumstance. So I think it's a really close fight. Both of us going with Ireland's the future Ian Garry. Again, let us know in the comment section below, because I'm on the fence about this one. I'm honest with you folks. If you make a great argument against Gabe Green, I'll give you your flowers over there in the comment section. Great title fights up at the top of this card. Should be an amazing one. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.